Hey everyone, MinerBiker here. If you've already seen the last videos I posted recently or follow me on Instagram, you know that Fezzari graciously provided the opportunity for me to do an extended demo on a very exciting bike, the new LaSal Peak. Before diving into the review, let's take a quick trip through time to see where this bike came from. So Fezzari released the first version of the LaSal Peak in 2018. It was a fantastic bike that was right on the cutting edge at the time, and it rightfully earned a lot of praise and popularity. That has been my go-to bike for the last 4 years, and I have racked up thousands of miles on my two LaSal frames. The 150mm rear travel and 160 or 170mm front travel was and is a great spot for most of what I do, and I have absolutely loved how all-around capable the bike has been. It pedaled and climbed more than well enough for the normal trail rides and backcountry adventures I do, and could easily hold its own on big descents and at bike parks. Although there definitely have been times when I found the limit of what a 150mm travel bike can handle. Overall, the first generation LaSal Peak is my favorite and most all-around capable bike I have had so far. A few years later, Fezzari released the Delano Peak, a fantastic mid-travel trail bike. An interesting and cool thing about the Delano is that it can be long shocked up to 147mm rear travel and run a fork up to 160mm, which is basically the same travel as the LaSal at the time. A lot of people, including some of Fezzari's enduro racers, were preferring the long shock Delano over the old LaSal because of some of the geometry and design updates and improvements. It didn't take long for news to start circulating that the LaSal was getting a redesign. A big redesign, in every sense of the word big. In early 2022, Fezzari released the second generation LaSal Peak. It packs a Super Enduro amount of rear travel at 170mm, with stock fork options of 170 or 180mm. If that wasn't enough, Fezzari officially okayed it for running dual crown downhill forks, so it could be built into a park or free ride shredding machine. The frame was completely redesigned with a slacker head angle, much lower standover height, and many other improvements. But amazingly, it was also said that this new beast of a bike could pedal and climb as well, if not even a little better, than the first generation LaSal. And I'll admit, when I first heard that, I was pretty skeptical. It was hard to imagine that adding 20mm more travel wouldn't have some negative effect on its climbing and pedaling ability. So when Fezzari offered me the opportunity to bring a demo LaSal home and test it out on my own trails and my own type of riding, I jumped at the chance to see what this bike could really do. I knew it would be amazing on the descents, although I wasn't quite sure what to expect, since it would be the longest travel bike I'd ever ridden. My main question was, could this thing really climb and pedal as well as my old LaSal? Could it be the main full suspension bike for someone like me who rarely shuttles anything and often pedals long distances with thousands of feet of elevation gain to get to rough backcountry descents that were never built with bikes in mind? Could this bike do a normal trail ride or twist and turn and punch through tech without feeling big, slow, and cumbersome? So trying to keep as open-minded and free of preconceptions as possible, I brought this super bike home and planned how I was going to test it out as thoroughly as I could. By the time I was 5 minutes into the first ride on the Richfield trails, I was already thinking that the claims about how this bike could climb might actually be true. The new LaSal really was climbing trails just as well as my old LaSal had dozens of times before. Flowy, smooth trails, switchbacks, and a handful of techie and steep sections all rolled away under this big bike's wheels as it steadily cruised upward. Now, it is certainly no XC or shorter travel trail bike on the climbs, but for what it is, I was blown away by how well it handled over 2,000 feet of elevation gain on that first ride. I was especially impressed with how responsive the bike was to power input. There was no feeling of the long travel trying to absorb the energy I applied to the pedals. Instead, it efficiently transferred the energy through to the wheel and drove onward and upward. If anything, the pedaling platform felt a bit more efficient than the old LaSal, and even more than some other bikes I've ridden with much shorter rear travel. Then I pointed the bike downhill. The first bit was flowy and fairly smooth, and the bike just cruised along almost lazily. Then came the first rock garden with a series of fast, chunky drops, and it flew down them so composed and smooth that I could hardly believe what I had just felt. On down we went with the bike railing turns, popping quite happily into the air, demolishing rock gardens with ease, flying off drops with silky smoothness and begging me to let go of the brakes more so it could go faster. On a few occasions, I knew a spot was coming that was a big, harsh hit, and I'd brace for impact, only to be left wondering, wait, was that it? As the harshness never came. It was as incredible or more than I expected a bike like this to be. There were times when the descent smoothed out for a bit, and the bike almost seemed bored as it cruised along, waiting for its next chance to punish a rock for getting in its way. That said, it still felt great on the smooth and flowy stuff too, pumping and rolling happily along. After the first ride, I really wanted to see what it could climb to make sure I wasn't just in the new bike honeymoon phase where everything seems perfect. A 6-mile, 3,000-foot steep grinding road climb to a wild, sketchy old horse trail descent seemed like a good testing ground. While climbing West Willow Creek, which I've done many times on at least 4 bikes, the new LaSal once again felt like it was pedaling along with the efficiency of a much shorter travel bike. I wasn't pushing hard and just climbed at the pace my body and the bike felt like they wanted to go. Arriving at the top, I was impressed by how well the bike had done, and I then looked forward to the descent down Red Canyon. The big bike handled the tight twisting old horse and hiking trail with its many rocky wash crossings with ease. It actually felt like it turned around the couple of very tight, steep switchbacks easier than my old LaSal, which I attribute to my being on a size medium new LaSal versus my size large old one, so the wheelbase is slightly shorter. After making easy work of the Red Canyon descent, I synced my Strava at the end of the ride and was absolutely blown away to see that I had got my best time up the West Willow Creek climb. If someone had told me before, during, or even after getting to the top that I would PR that tough road climb on a 170mm travel enduro bike, I'd have said they were crazy. That one ride pretty decisively answered my question of, does this bike climb as well or better than my old one? Short answer, yes it does. And the other rides I've done on it, as well as riding it back to back with my old LaSal, only confirmed that. And of course, it does what these modern Super Enduro bikes we're seeing these days do on the descents. From bike parks to race stages to techie rock smashing to backcountry epic descents, this big machine loves to point downhill. So if this bike can descend almost like a small DH bike, yet can still handle pedaling and climbing well enough to earn those descents the proper way, should just anyone buy this big of a bike? If your riding would not be utilizing at least close to the full capability of this bike on a somewhat regular basis, I don't see the point of getting a bike this big. As good as the LaSal is, there's no denying that a shorter travel bike like the Delano Peak or Signal Peak would be even more efficient, lighter weight, more responsive and playful, and better for climbing and the vast majority of trail riding. There is no point in having 170mm of travel if your riding is such that you'll never actually use it fully, especially when there will always be at least some penalty to be paid as far as efficiency and weight are concerned. I am one who would prefer to be overbiked than underbiked in most cases, but it always makes me wonder when I see someone riding a longer travel bike without ever actually using the whole travel. And being too overbiked all the time is not a good thing in my opinion. That said, if the riding you do on it would utilize the full capability of this bike, at least a regular portion of the time, I do think it is all around capable enough to justify having it. Or obviously, if you already have a shorter travel bike and are just looking to add a big hitter, then this bike is definitely up your alley. After all the test rides I did on it, I've concluded that the new LaSal could be my main full suspension, replacing my old LaSal. Obviously, it descends amazingly. My riding would make use of the full travel regularly enough to justify having it, and it pedals and climbs well enough to handle a huge variety of riding I would do on it. I debated back and forth for a while. If I were to replace my old LaSal, would I do it with the new LaSal or with a long shock Delano? In a perfect world, I'd have the stock mid-travel Delano and the new LaSal, but since when is this world perfect? For a lot of my riding, I think the Delano would be slightly better, and the Delano can hold 2 water bottle cages in the main triangle, which the new LaSal cannot, which is a point of consideration for me. But as I rode the new LaSal more, my thought now is that having the extra travel for the, say, 20% of the time I'd actually use all of it, would be more beneficial to me in my riding than the marginal gains the Delano would provide at the other end of the spectrum over the LaSal. But that's me and my riding, and for the majority of average riders, I do not think a bike like this makes sense. Overall, I was seriously blown away and impressed with the new LaSal Peak, and whenever I do replace my faithful old LaSal, it will most likely be with the new LaSal. Absolutely massive thank you to Fezzari for the opportunity to test out and review this incredible bike. Hopefully you found this video informative and useful. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a comment down below, give that like button a hit, and if you've subscribed already, thank you so much. If you haven't, I invite you to do so. It really helps and means a lot. Thanks again. Keep digging up new places to ride, and check out Fezzari Bicycles.